بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. Praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has guided us to this, and we would have not been guided if Allah had not guided us. Assalamu alaikum, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining again. We are very pleased to be joined by a special guest this time, which is, at least for me, for Strong Support, is the first time that we've had a female presenter. And based on the feedback that we got from the webinars, it was felt that there was perhaps not so much of a perspective or of a view of those struggling with unwanted same-sex lust from a female perspective. And inshallah, we can, in this webinar, we can delve a bit more into that. But before we start, I'll like to kind of introduce some of the updates that we have from Strong Support. So let's see if I just share my screen. So as you know, we have the webinars, and we're very happy to have Leah with us all the way from Australia, which is it's kind of 10 p.m. here, so it's I'm sitting in the UK. It's just hitting noon at the moment, so we're very happy that at this kind of late hour she's managed to join us, and I got introduced to Leah through the Free to Change movement, which is done by Cause, and her own personal journey is something which is very, very intriguing. She lives in Melbourne now. She's married. She has a 2-year-old son, and she continues to help people in this journey. And with the Free to Change survey, which saw over 60 participants worldwide, different ethnicities, different religions, it really put the point that this is a worldwide effort. So it's not something just here we're doing in the UK. There's a worldwide effort in bringing these stories to light and seeing kind of maybe the difficulties which is posed by current legislation for people who are accessing help in this regard. So all of our webinars you can find on the website by going on the webinars link, and they're all recorded, so you can go on our previous webinars and see. Well, we've also started, in light of this talk, in light of this movement, is a women's support circle. So as you probably know, Strong Support's been mainly men's support circle, but what we're trying to do at the moment is to gauge interest for the Muslim women who would benefit from this service. So basically, there's a register form here, and you just fill out your details. And at the moment, it's basically just so we can get details and then see what days work for you, and when best to kind of have that. Also, a lot of you have been asking for the membership or the donation model. So if you go and donate, we now, after quite help, I've managed to set up monthly donations, alhamdulillah. So we'll be getting some information about that. And you can join us as a member, and there's advantages to membership. So that's recently been set in place. And also, I just wanted to say that it's been a year for Strong Support. So we started in October last year, and it's just we started with the Muslim Vibe podcast in October, and it's been a journey. The year has gone so fast for me. It's just gone so fast that And we've had different guests on the webinar. We've had over 200 people contact us. We have a running group on Wednesdays, 2 on Sundays, and every week we get 2 or 3 people from all over the world asking for help, and we offer free consultation and guidance and orientation. So for me personally, I just wanted to give an update of a thanks and gratitude to the community who's been supporting us since our inception in a year ago. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for your support and all the volunteers, which you don't see. You only see me, you don't see the people in the background. So big thanks to everyone for that. And inshallah you will continue to support us. So today I'm really excited to invite Leah. And I said, as before, it's quite late there. So I'm going to be conscious of the time. And I'm very happy. I actually spoke to Leah informally just to introduce the organization and what we do. And honestly, she's, very lovely character. She even said if she could support the women, which this webinar is geared to in any way, she'd be open to do that. So I'm going to hand over to pass the mic to Leah. So firstly, thank you so much for joining us today, Leah. Would you like to kind of start on at the start of the journey when, in terms of SSA, how you found out, or even before the journey, and what your story has been?
Yeah, for sure. I thank you for the opportunity. Really privileged and humbled to be able to come on board and just share my experience, and I hope it's an encouragement and shares some hope for some people, because I think was certainly a big part of my story, just being able to hear someone else's testimony and finding hope in their journey, I guess, that someone else has walked this road. And it's a powerful thing, I think, to hear that someone else has gone through the similar steps and actually come through, and still growing and still learning a lot. But it's really encouraging. So I hope it's of encouragement to those who hear. And I just thank you, Ali, for the opportunity. And I think, you guys are doing a great job with the ministry. It's really vital to have such a good support network and community. It's such a vital part of this journey. And it was very much a part of my journey to have that support. So I think when I think back on sort of where it all started for me, to be honest, when I was younger, I sort of identify more having that what is known now today as that gender dysphoria, sort of confusion about my gender, rather than the same-sex attraction sort of revealing itself. That sort of came a bit later on. But I didn't know why God had made me a girl. I just thought I should have been a boy. I thought it'd be a lot easier if I was a boy, and I was a typical tomboy. I was quite different to my sisters. They're quite girly girl, and I still am. I love sports. I love outdoors. I love sort of that practical side, that boys naturally gravitate to. I sort of felt, as you hear in most stories like this, I felt quite different, and I was a bit of the odd one out. So that's where it sort of mainly started for me. And then that, I wrestled with that a little bit, but I just thought, oh well, it's just who I am. and to be honest, my Christian faith sort of started to really become much more prominent in my life, sort of in that early teenage sort of stage of my life. So I'd been brought up in a Christian home, very loving, healthy environment. And I guess that's what probably made my questions even more confusing, because I thought I should have had it all together. I think that sort of is quite probably the difference for a lot of us who are brought up in a religious setting as to those who aren't. We feel like we should know better, or we should, just happen to fall along a pathway that we've been brought up in. And when all these questions sort of come into our minds, it sort of places more guilt and more shame on us because we think it's our fault.
Definitely.
So that sort of raised a lot of questions for me, particularly once I started to own my faith, and it wasn't just something that my parents told me about, but it was something I wanted to really take on board. So once I became a Christian, I just thought that these feelings of uncertainty would just disappear, but they didn't, did they? They sort of
and that's so common in the
Yeah.
experience, isn't it, of people
Yeah.
of faith, that they think, okay, surely I've listened to God, I've listened to what's needed, I'm following what I my heart says, what my belief says, and I'm following those values. So surely God's just going to take this away, isn't it? Because I'm into it. Yeah.
And you feel like you're letting your parents down and yourself down. So it can be quite I think it's a conflicting time, probably around teenagers for anyone. There's a lot of development, and the culture throws a lot at us, and so there's a lot of uncertainty during that time anyway. But throwing in same-sex attraction certainly made it a difficult a difficult teenage time. But I just tried to ignore it. I hoped it would go away, but it didn't. And if anything, it just sort of grew more and more, and sort of to my late teenage years, it just sort of made me think, hang on, this isn't just disappearing. Maybe it's something I need to address. You happy for me to keep going? Or
So at this moment of time, you're, like you've said, you've had the confusion of this is my faith systems and my faith values, but these desires are coming from within. They're not like, I'm doing my best to follow the faith as well as I can, but I still have these feelings which are coming from within, and it's that conflict which is that you're saying you found yourself in. So how did what did that look like then in the years that followed after that?
I think just to go back to sort of touch on the gender dysphoria. I know that's a very modern term now, so I wouldn't have considered it that back in those days. But just my confusion around being a girl, that did sort of ease off a bit, like, again, coming through teenage and puberty, and again, having a faith that reiterated to me that God didn't actually make a mistake. Like, I was created as a girl for a reason, and I mean, a verse that comes to my mind is Psalm 139, where it talks about being formed in my inward parts were being formed as I was growing in my mother's womb, and that stood out to me a lot, because it wasn't just God making me, making my fingers and my toes and all this. He was forming everything going on inside me, my brain, my development, even my genitalia, if I can be that honest about it. And this wasn't a mistake. And so I slowly learnt that I came to accept that that's who God made me, and I was okay with that. but yeah, so just heading into sort of late teens, and I guess when I went to uni, that's when things really was quite confronting for me in terms of my same-sex attraction. Again, because I tried to, you know, sweep it under the carpet, and then when I hit uni life, I think, you know, you're independent, and you know, you're sort of confronted with a sort of more wild scenes in the world, I guess, that that I hadn't sort of been exposed to previously, and that's probably when I really had to ask some hard questions about why I was feeling the way I was feeling in terms of my same-sex attraction. And yeah, I mean, I didn't really I didn't like the party life that uni presented, but at the same time there was this appeal about how people lived their life, you know, just so freely and however they felt. And you know, so I mean, again, for everyone it's a challenging time, but yeah, I really just wrestled with that even more, and began to just keep questioning God, why, you know, can I be a gay Christian? You know, I mean, I've learned that that's not how God designed it, but why am I feeling this, as you say, so innately? And it's a real struggle. It's not something that you can just snap out of. It feels innate. That's why people think they're born gay, because it feels very real. And I guess because we've been there's been some sort of influence either from childhood or something. It's very deep rooted, you know, something's happened to make us think certain things or believe certain lies, and yeah, it's sort of formed why we're feeling certain things. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, your reflection, and perhaps so much of us have that hindsight now where we can look at childhood and look at it more objectively. Whereas when we're having those feelings, we don't really connect our experiences in the past with what we're feeling now. We think, oh, I'm just feeling this and I don't know where this has come from. And like you say, it's coming from within. And there's and you know, we'll get into like in your recovery, you must have said, okay, so there were these things in my childhood or growing up, or my life before that contributed, you know, things that may have contributed to the attraction. Would but in terms of also everyone, you know, especially youth today, when they're first time they're independent, the university life is, or the college life is, oh, I'm independent for the first time, I've not got anybody to see what I'm doing. And it's that, as you can say, it's that freedom or that liberating experience where you can kind of explore as such, isn't it? So was that something for you at that time in college, university?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we live in a society that that really pushes people to explore, you know, to pursue relationships, you know, very deeply, and whatever relationship suits. And I mean, we're very much encouraged to explore things that, you know, normally, you know, we probably wouldn't have been encouraged to.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that was true for me. I think I was still quite reserved within myself around uni. I sort of did keep to myself quite a bit, probably because things were just so confronting with how I was feeling and what I was seeing. But I think there was just a pivotal relationship that that sort of formulated around my university days, and that sort of, I guess, sort of blossomed into something that I just didn't see coming, and it was a friendship that I guess I'd sort of been longing for in a way throughout my upbringing. I thought, oh, finally someone I can connect with, I feel like she understands me, and I feel like I've known her for years. And again, I think this is quite typical in some of the female relationships that happen, and you just kind of glue together. And that was probably the most sort of confronting time where I had to really not question, but I was really confronted with this idea of, hey, I might be a little bit more attracted to her kind of thing than just a general friendship type thing. And so that was probably my pivotal turn that put me down a particular pathway that sort of aligned with how I was feeling, but I was kind of suppressing those feelings until this friendship came along. And it just sort of went from there.
Yeah, and I think as you mentioned in female relationships, there's books which are available, Janelle Hallman and others. It's the attachment, which is very, very strong, which we see in the female SSA, where kind of like Bowlby's theory of different types of attachments, where you feel if the other person isn't there, it's almost like I don't exist, or it's a very strong, deep type of attachment, which, like you say, is stronger than the normal friendship relationship you would have. And and this is where I guess it's interesting for me in terms of the male SSA and the female SSA, whereas the male SSAs may just be visual for some people. It's very much, kind of lust driven, whereas the female experience tends to be driven by the emotional need for connection, or the emotional need for support, which perhaps wasn't available before, or in childhood, or at some point before. It felt that I don't have this type of support as a woman. And I think when you mentioned, your experience of gender dysphoria, then that adds to the fact, like, oh, finally I'm getting attention from a female, or finally I'm being considered as one of them, and that sense of affirmation, if you like, as a woman, is very empowering. So I guess um, that friendship develops and then it crosses lines, so it would cross that line of um, sexual intimacy, in a sense, because you feel so it almost feels like I've been yearning for this, and I've been longing for this, and finally now I'm getting the affirmation and the appreciation and the affection which I've been looking at for such a long time.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. And I think, I've heard it described as, there's only so much connection you can do with someone until it does cross that sexual boundary. And so that's what it is for a lot of female relationships. And you mentioned that the difference between sort of male versus female same-sex attraction. I mean, there's some very similar things, and then there's some very different things. And for some women, even their same-sex attraction can happen later on in life, because it can happen with their best friend, and something happens in their life. They either suffer grief or loss, and they cleave to this best friend, and they keep connecting, and there's just so much, like I say, connecting you can do until that it crosses into that sexual boundary. And so that's quite typical, I guess, of what can happen, for sure.
Definitely. Well, I know that you were involved with the cause charity, which is doing great work, primarily when they started with the what was being taught in schools, which is the same thing that we're trying, in the UK, where we're having the same issue at the moment, where you have people trying to force a certain agenda of, you know, like this is exactly what should be taught in terms of the whole curriculum.
Yeah.
And some of the things for most people were just too explicit or were just too complex for children to
Yeah.
understand at that age where it was being um, given. I mean, I'm all for education and I'm all for um, letting people know exactly how things are. But in terms of growing up when you're not even sure who you are as a boy or a girl, having being introduced to different types can be confusing.
Mm.
Um, you know, so, and also in early gender development, when you're trying to find yourself, if you think, oh, I'm slightly this way, I'm more masculine than I'm feminine, for example, and then that if that confusion is almost affirmed as okay, then it becomes, you know, I mean, recently the strong support has been seeing more cases of people coming with gender dysphoria, even though that's not something we
Mm.
fully address, but it's coming at a point where we're seeing that parents being worried about it. So I think causes started with that, you know, education in schools and kind of um, going back to what we would call Abrahamic values in a sense, you know, of what male and female roles are. So I saw, I think was it last year, where the free to change or you know kind of this survey came forward, and I guess it was because of the legislation which
Yeah.
was going to be put forward, and we actually I we had a session in one of our support circle sessions, and the entire session was dedicated on that report that you did of
Wow.
60 people, because it was so interesting to see
Yeah.
what worked for people, what didn't work, or you know what type of support that they were using. um, but would you like to tell us a little bit about that project?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, just to, you know, ditto what you're saying. I think it's yeah, Cause has done a wonderful job trying to protect children. Basically, I mean, children are just so vulnerable as they're. I mean, I look at my 2-year-old son, and he, you know, the children are just in this constant state of absorbing and learning, and you know, it's not until we become adults that we filter things out and we start to become focused, and you know, but when they're children, they're just taking everything in,
Mm,
and so we really have to be careful about what they're exposed to, you know, and protecting those little ones from either seeing things or hearing things too early is just, I mean, we agree it's just not healthy for their development. um, I even think about, you know, sometimes, like, it's well known that sort of around, I think it's age 3 or 4 or something, you know, those kids are so bonded to either one of their parents, whether it's their mum or their dad, and they're so attached to them that they generally think that when they're older they're going to marry one of their parents.
mhm.
Now that's quite normal in
Yes.
development, you
Yeah.
know, but if we were to somehow carry that train of thought, I mean, who knows where that could go, you know. Obviously, you know, a child's development to sort of start to question and think through those sorts of things is actually quite normal. And so if we start to run with ideas that, yeah, that they think they're a boy when they're a girl, or vice versa, or other things, yeah, we just have to maybe settle down and allow their brain to develop, and um, sort of allow their biology to take its course, particularly through puberty. Anyway, that's a whole nother topic, but I guess it's quite intertwined with all these legislations that are coming through, because even though the legislations target people who are same-sex attracted and transgender and all that, it also very much targets it from when, you know, kids are kids, and so it's all quite intertwined. But yeah, this project really came along when we saw the danger in these legislations, and yeah, I guess Ed Sparius is the gentleman who is sort of driving this whole project, and he's sort of the founder of Cause and has done marvelous work with all that. And so he sort of got in touch with a number of us people who have testimonies of walking away from the LGBT life. And we're all over Australia, some are in Perth and some of us are in Melbourne here. And so we decided to get together and put up our hands and say, hey, actually, we have stories that say that we have walked away from that life. Change is possible. It's a hard road, but it is possible. Some wonderful benefits and joys come from it, like being married. And I mean, it's not an easy it's not an easy road. Marriage is not easy,
No.
but it certainly brings an amazing amount of contentment and joy that I never thought I could ever experience. So change is possible, but also the process and the road to change through various forms of help, whether it's professional help or religious help from churches or spiritual leaders or whatever, that it is possible. Unlike the many things you hear in media today and the reports they come out with that change has been harmful to people. We wanted to stand up and say that actually we haven't, that's not our experience. Our experience is one of amazing positive help and support, and it's quite vital to people who want to pursue coming out of that life. So yeah, we sort of put our own hands up to say we have stories like that, but then we thought, hang on, we need more stories. We need, more stories and more of a volume to be able to put a case forward and say, actually, there's a large number of us here. And a lot of it was based, a lot of the legislation here in Australia anyway was based on a report that was done that only covered 15 people and their stories of the harm that they had experienced. And so we thought, we can definitely produce a lot more stories. Not to say that those stories are invalid. I think we'd be amiss to acknowledge that there have been experiences that have been harmful. We're not in denial about that. But we do say that, and for those people that is, they do need a lot of love and support from the church and from people of faith, because they have been hurt along the way. But I think we had to also say that while there has been some harm that's been done, there's been an overwhelming amount of positivity with the help and counsel and support that is out there. So to ban those things would be to prevent people like me and you, Ali, and many people from pursuing the life that we hope for. So
I mean, absolutely, as you said, there's we're promoting a balanced debate. We're promoting people, we aren't silencing the voices who are in any way hurt by it. And for kind of for both, I can, and I'm sure you can also see the type of discrimination which certain members in any faith, out of ignorance of what SSA is, or kind of they have that, or like in Muslims it would, and I don't know if it's same in the Christian experience, would be, oh, this is forbidden, so why are you doing it? It's almost like, well, it's a sin, then why are we talking about this? Because it's a sin. We shouldn't be talking about it. We shouldn't be promoting sin. And what they're not grasping is that we all, everyone sins. So and if we don't have spaces where we can talk about that and talk about our struggles, then that's not conducive to people to living a life according to their beliefs and values, because they're struggling. And even with strong support, we say we're not anti-LGBT, so we're not saying we're against this movement. We have a different ideology, we have
mm,
a different way of looking at things, but we're not coming here and saying, oh, let's ban all LGBT institutions, or let's ban everybody who has a different view other than us. And we're just asking people to say, hey, um, you know, I mean, you see this in the media where they will not interview people who identify as ex-gay, even if people come forward and they say, we want our story. And um, it's very frightening to see how biased the reporting is,
mm,
where it's not considering two views. I mean, where a better solution would be to regulate the practice, to bring measures, to introduce, to ensure that there's harm, there or a survey to see people who have had the therapy or have had any consultations, how has the experience been.
mm,
But what we're seeing is the even here in the United Kingdom, when they tried to do that, when the government tried to collect that data, it was shut down by LGBT activists saying, how could you even ask people uh, who've done that. So the
mm,
premise is saying we will only listen to people who've had negative experiences. And
mm,
while, like you said, we aren't minimizing those experiences at all, and they should have their say, we are of a different thinking and of a different ideology, and not just us, whole faith, communities are of that. So to kind of denounce that, even in an academic perspective, you have many ideological differences, but to
mm,
shut one ideological viewpoint down, um, firstly, it's not conducive because there's a very huge population which will say, for whatever reason, whether it's faith-based or non-faith-based, that actually same-sex attraction isn't something which I'd like to explore the potential of
mm,
something else. We're not saying this is what you need to be. We're saying let's give people access and support to explore by their own determination, their own self-determination, what they want to be doing, and if there is something which is harmful, or let's make sure that doesn't happen, let's regulate that. um, and I think if most people hear that, and if most people hear that clarity, then they would say, okay, yes, let's have a level playing field. I mean, I'm studying counseling at the moment, and I don't see any other therapeutic practice which is being banned like this.
mm,
There isn't any other, there's 300 different types of modalities in therapy. There's
mm,
300 different types of them. We only hear of the, like the three major: humanistic, psychodynamic, integrative, but CBT, we've got whole other modalities, and they
mm,
don't show up in the news. They don't, you know, and it's only this conversion therapy which kind of shows up in the news. And it just so happens that, people like me and you who are um, working in that, it becomes difficult for people like us. Um, I mean, for you were at the forefront at the free to change with the videos and things like that. I'm sure you kind of share some of the frustration in this. But how has, by doing that, the project, and seeing so many people sign up, uh, what has your experience been? Has it given you hope, or is it given, what's your feelings at the moment after doing that?
yeah, I'll answer that question. I just want to go back a little bit to just 2 points about yeah, this the activists who are trying to sort of suppress the balanced side of the story, I guess there feels like there's a bit of a different agenda. I mean, they want to ban this so-called conversion therapy, but I feel like they're also just trying to shut down religion or shut down people who have some kind of faith-based ideology. And I say that because it's quite, even though, like, we acknowledge there are people who have experienced harm, a lot of the stories have been shown to be unfortunately quite twisted, or they reflect a practice that was done many years ago and wasn't even done by in a religious context. So you know, things like aversion therapy and all that, the horror stories that you hear and that mainstream media hear about conversion therapy, if I had no idea about the type of support, you know, if I was not at all familiar with this area, and if I were to hear some of the stories that people think is what conversion therapy is, I'd say, yeah, that needs to be banned because it sounds horrible, but they're pulling it from very different eras. They're pulling it from psychological practices that simply don't happen anymore. And so there's a little bit of mistruth that happens that's convincing society that conversion therapy is really all bad. So that's a part of our process, is to try and educate people that actually, I mean, we don't call it conversion therapy, but the definition that the government's giving it, conversion therapy, there's a whole lot more to it than what meets the eye in terms of mainstream media. And the other point I just want to quickly make was, yes, you're exactly right, Ali, in terms of we need to be able to give people that option of, you know, it's not just about channeling them into one type of lifestyle because that's your only option. And I think this is particularly crucial for the transgender argument. You know, I mean, for those who are either lesbian or gay, I mean, it's sort of been around a lot longer, and so there's more opportunity to hear of people who have walked away from that life. But with transgenderism, it's so new in some sense, and they're just being channeled that there is only one option. And I think even more so we need to create the other voice that says, actually, there are alternatives. And we hear so many stories of people who go through, you know, the hormone blockers and the cross-sex hormones and all that, and then they follow through with surgery, and then they come out the other end and say, I was never given any other option by the doctors. And that's the tragedy of it, that so much permanent damage is done, or permanent change is done, without having any other alternative option there. Anyway, so that's a lot of our focus with this project, is to just try and sensitively and calmly produce an alternative and another perspective that will help people think, that it's not all bad. In fact, there's a lot of good. And now I've forgotten your question. I'm sorry that I deviated from. So I'm sorry about that.
What was your, after doing the project, what were some of your feelings and, you know, takeaways from it after, you know, I know the legislation is still under review, or they've passed certain, I think certain cities have passed it.
Look, my first thought that comes to mind is I mean, I knew that there were stories out there, and to be honest, I'm sort of only, you know, about 5 years in this ministry. My recovery process has taken 10 to 15 years, but I'm quite fresh in terms of being involved in the ministry and being able to network with people. There are people like Shirley Basket, who are a lot more familiar with people and stories all over the globe, really. But so being fresh, I guess I knew there were stories out there, and I knew quite a number of people. But now the people that have come in and being a part of this project, I'm so much more encouraged. You know, there are just so many wonderful stories of change, and like I say, with a lot of stories there's similarities, but with a lot of, you know, there are also wonderful new revelations that you learn and receive from people who are coming on board. And so it's really encouraging to hear just even people of different faiths, like you say yourself, Ali, and it's just so encouraging to know that it's hard to speak up and share your story, but the people who do, it's just so wonderful to hear. So I'm encouraged, and I continue to be encouraged. I think we have over 60 people now who have participated, and many more who have, you know, had contact with. And yeah, it's a privilege for me to watch. In terms of the you know, the legislation that for us, so I'm in Melbourne, Victoria. The legislation hasn't gone through yet, but we're expecting it, you know, potentially early next year. It's gone through in the ACT and it's gone through in Queensland. So yeah, there are still a number of states to go, but to be honest, we hope that the legislation is banned, but you know, we're realistic. There's a lot of support out there, particularly amongst MPs, for this legislation to pass. I think New Zealand have passed it recently, or are about to as well. So you know, you feel like it's an uphill battle. For us, though, I mean, again, our biggest priority is to try and stop the legislation, but I think a wonderful secondary result is the fact that, like I say, we are able to educate people. We're starting to get into churches and talk to people, have conversations that we never would have had, and assuming that this legislation will go through and that we will experience difficulty with the ministries that we do. You know, at the same time, God works all these things for good, and somehow, you know, we do find with how it's getting more difficult to run these sorts of ministries and have these sorts of conversations, we actually find more people coming forward and saying, hey, I need help, you know. So, you know, the legislation is dangerous and we don't want it to pass, but at the same time, it won't stop us. We will always be available for help for those who need it. And yeah, it's one of those things that you have to trust God for. Persecution sometimes brings about growth, and yeah, we're expecting that. So yeah, we continue to preach and you know, tell the good news and help people to find change.
Well, I think you've said it beautifully in the sense that, you know, even though we have this kind of growing tension with the legislation, which has so much support, as a byproduct, that's caused the if we call it the ex-LGBT community in a way to strengthen, because as a byproduct, and it means that actually if you are in the news for an opposition, then you know what they say is any publicity is good publicity, in a sense, isn't it? That people then know, actually, yeah, we don't agree with this, so we're seeing groups and ministries like yours, which are then having that presence. And you know, for if it wasn't for this, then we've just got someone like this webinar now, where you're sat in Australia, I'm in the UK. We wouldn't have these conversations happening. So you're absolutely right in terms of as a byproduct, it's caused us as a community to come closer, and you know, and definitely
and communities that we don't even expect, you know, like the transgender movement is actually hurting the lesbian movement quite a lot, you know, and so it's ironic that the LGBT community is actually starting to attack each other, and so we've found that we can actually sort of team up, I guess, a little bit with the lesbian community, who are feeling extremely vulnerable and attacked by the transgender movement, and so we can we can try and get on board together and say, actually, we shouldn't have transgender people playing in women's sport. I mean, that's a big thing at the moment. I'm not sure if that's sort of reached across the seas, but the Tasmanian senator has been, talking a lot about that, and it's really interesting. The communities that normally would be very divided have actually started to come together and work together. And yeah, just like you're saying, Ali, it's great to have people from the UK and different religious groups, banding together. We're talking with the Jewish community, and this is what we need to do rather than do separate fights.
Absolutely. No, couldn't agree more. Yeah, and you're absolutely right with the transgender community. It's now emerging more of a community which needs our help and needs our support. So what I'd like to do is just to open up for some questions. If that's okay with you,
Please,
Leah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of questions, we can you can raise. So you'll see on the webinar, you'll have a option at the bottom, raise hand. So you can kind of raise hand, and then just know that this is on Facebook Live, so that it is public. So just be kind of aware of that. If you want to ask a question anonymously, then you can do that at the Q&A, which is below, and you can also upvote the questions as such. So I have a question at the moment in the Q&A. It's by and it says there's a few questions here. So the first one is saying, did you ever try to connect the dots in your life to determine how and why your SSA developed? And then it says, when you were struggling with your SSA, did you feel disconnected from other women or feel different to them? Because this happens with SSA males. How did you deal with these feelings? And then the third point is, I always feel reservations about marriage. I don't know if I can get married or whether I should bother trying. As someone who is married after experiencing SSA, what have you gained in life, and why do you think others should also strongly consider it? So the first point is around determining or connecting dots, like we said when we started, like, oh, I could see these things contributed to the SSA.
Yeah, I mean, I think throughout my journey, I saw 2 psychologists, which I found really difficult to do. Again, coming from a conservative Christian home, who we were meant to have it all together. So I felt like I felt weak to have to go to a psychologist, but it proved helpful in some ways to be able to work to navigate through some of that stuff. To be honest, a part of me, I asked that question a lot, and so I tried to navigate through all that, but I also at the same time didn't want to dwell on it a whole lot, because sometimes I just didn't have the answer. And so I think it's helpful to go back into your past and sort of see what may have triggered or brought that about. But at the same time, if we dwell on it, then we start really blaming, and we sort of sit on that. So I think it's helpful to some degree if we can identify what's happened and then be able to either forgive whoever or be able to move on. That's beneficial. But like I say, to dwell on it doesn't necessarily, it isn't all that productive sometimes. And that's just what I found. But for me personally, I never really had, I mean, you hear a lot about people who have same-sex attraction. They may have been abused as a child, or something quite traumatic may have happened. And I mean, I didn't have that from what I could remember. I haven't been abused. So again, it just sort of threw more questions up. Well, why am I the way I am? And I think there are just so many factors that can happen. I think particularly for men, you know, from what I hear, again, it's obviously not my experience, but, you know, sometimes there's exposure to pornography at a young age, which the child couldn't help, but they were confronted with it. And I've heard it talked about before that sometimes childhood experiences can leave a bit of a blueprint in our mind, and it sort of begins the trajectory of where our sexual desire comes from mainly, or is directed to, I should say. So yeah, so for some boys, the exposure to pornography sort of sets them on that pathway, or like I say, abuse can definitely trigger that. But for me, I think it was just a lot of little factors that happened throughout. Yeah, and I'm not even very certain of it, of that was definitely it. But like I said, I was a tomboy and I was quite different, and I think your personality can definitely sort of, if I can use the word, predispose you to it. It doesn't mean that all tomboys or all girls who love sport end up that way, but yeah, that sort of, again, made me question a lot. And because I was so different to my sisters, I often felt the thoughts that I don't know, people like my aunties and just close family and friends, you know, their ideas of, or maybe that it was my perception of what their ideas were from my sisters to me. So if we had a family gathering, say for instance, and my sisters would dress up quite girly, they'd wear dresses, and I didn't. I wore shorts and t-shirts so I could go and play sport with the boys. And so on the odd occasion that my mum convinced me to wear a dress, I'd turn up at the family event and there was this big shock horror, and they'd sort of say, "Oh, Leah's wearing a dress, you look so beautiful." And it was almost that over attention that made me sort of hide even more. And you know, so again, I don't want to dwell on it because it wasn't my auntie's fault or anyone's fault. It was just how I perceived it at the time. And I think children can go through the same upbringing or the same experience, but interpret things very differently. And I feel like that's what happened with me for a lot of the time. I just interpreted things very personally and very sort of overthought things quite a bit. What were they thinking, you know? Yeah, so I can't really pinpoint what sort of happened, but one particular memory that I do have that stood out to me was there was a story in the media about a gentleman who had raped and killed a young girl, and I remember being really affected by it. And I don't know why. I mean, there are stories like that on the news all the time, but this particular story affected me, and I found out later that that particular gentleman happened to he used to go to the church of one of my mum's friends. And so all of a sudden it was very personal and close to home. And so again, it was my interpretation, and I really then felt like I couldn't trust men for some reason. And it turns out I was only 5 at the time. I sort of looked up the date and I just found out that, yeah, I was only 5. So again, I don't know whether that had a direct influence, but surely, you know, it would have contributed in some way.
Absolutely. I think
yeah, I could go on, but yeah, I mean, I think there are just so many small things that who knows.
There's and you're absolutely right that it isn't one thing, you know, and it's a combination of things. And I really liked what you said about the personal experience. So if you have siblings, then they would have interpreted it completely differently, or someone else would have said that wasn't how it was. And for some of us with SSA, we have a sensitive predisposition to certain things. So if we feel rejected from the opposite sex or the same sex, and we already have kind of a sensitivity around that, then that hurts us it hurts us more perhaps
Yeah.
than it would to someone else, because um, we already have pain around that
Yeah.
subject.
And
Um,
I think that that's a comfort to parents in a way as well. I mean,
mm,
I've just recently sort of started to engage a lot more with parents, and I mean, parents must go through the question of what did I do
what did
wrong,
I
you
do
know,
wrong? Yeah,
as a
absolutely.
parent,
Yeah.
and I mean, you can't. I mean, obviously, again, there are some situations where there has been abuse or something has happened, and but I think in the most case, you know, I sort of try and say to parents that yeah, I mean, kids will sometimes interpret things, and like you say, a lot of us are quite sensitive and take things quite to heart. And yeah, I think for women, overthink things, like I said,
Mm,
and um, yeah, so there's lots of varying factors that parents just can't pick up on every single kid's, you know, need,
of
and
course. Yeah,
it's just the way things go sometimes.
absolutely. And you know what you've just said, I was literally just discussing with my own family about a week ago at
Yeah,
this exact point, and I realized it took me a lot of maturity to reach this realization that it wasn't, it was for me, it wasn't my father, it was
yeah,
my interpretation of what he was doing.
mm, mm,
Even though now, like, I have a relationship where I can, as an adult, I can completely understand why those situations were, and that he didn't mean those things,
yeah,
and why I had a certain predisposition, so I took things on in a negative light.
sure,
Um, but to have that realization that, oh, actually it was, I'm also part of it, it was my thinking also played part of it,
mm,
is a huge maturity in um the step, because I imagine now you're a parent,
mm,
so you can recognize the difficulty of
yeah.
parenthood, whereas when we are a child, we don't see that, we don't understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we ultimately have to be able to trust that you know what the lives that our or the path that our lives are taking us on is actually ordained by God, and God is actually writing our testimony. He's writing our story so that in our cases we can actually reveal that God can bring about wonderful things, and the glory can go back to Him. So, it's hard for parents to, parents want to write their kids' own testimonies, and if my mum had have written my testimony or my life story, it would have looked very different. So obviously, I think we have to trust that God is he's paving the way, and he's as I read earlier today that a lifetime of history is God sees in but a single moment, and so He plans all this
Mm,
for His good, and so we have to trust that.
that's beautiful. Yeah. We have another question.
Mm.
It says, do you still have moments when your SSA flares up, even now after being married? And how do you better deal with that now? Tips on how to uh, desensitize myself to the physical, intimate aspect of marrying a man.
Mm. It's a little bit similar to the other question, I think, from, or was it the same
Yeah,
question?
in
Yeah,
terms of, I guess a lot of people have that step around marriage, isn't
yeah,
it? Because for the longest time, you're thinking, oh, I'm probably not going to have a relationship growing up. And then when that changes, and how, as you said in your earlier, that marriage has its own problems. It comes with
mm,
its own things, but it also comes with its blessings and
sure.
things. But I guess the question here is asking, how do you still keep and regulate the eye on the SSA while
Mm.
still being in the relationship?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd start off by saying that um, marriage should not be taken. I think we all agree on this, but marriage should not be taken to try and fix your same-sex
Mm,
attraction. Uh, it won't, and if anything, it's going to create more problems for you. So I would encourage people to, if they are experiencing same-sex attraction, to, as much as they can, try to work through some of those issues that they may have identified already, or may still yet to be identified. Yeah, to try and heal as much as possible, and come to a point where you do feel as if you can take that step to marriage, rather than just plunging into marriage fearing for the worst. So that would be my first recommendation. I mean, obviously, like we've said before, Ali, you know, we're growing all the time, so you can't wait forever to some extent, but I think there is a point at which you can genuinely say, yes, I'm ready to take this step. I'm ready to trust someone of the opposite sex, and I'm ready to commit my life, you know, to that person. In terms of while being married, how do you sort of monitor, you know, your same-sex attraction? Again, a great question. I think, I mean, first of all, I'd say accountability is absolutely crucial, and you know, your transparency with your spouse is absolutely crucial. You know, honesty from the get-go, but your accountability doesn't necessarily have to be with your spouse. Your accountability, I think, is helpful to be someone else, a trusted person, probably an older person, but I don't know, that's up to you, I guess, whatever sort of, you know, circle you're in. Yeah, someone that you can trust, but also someone who's bold enough to tell you when something's not quite right, or give you the hard advice, I guess. So yeah, if you have someone you can really deeply rely on and say, hey, look, you know, even if it's someone you can just send them a text and say, can you pray for me? I'm just having some thoughts right now, or you know, another example is, you know, I've made a friend and I feel really connected to this friend. And I feel like it's great, but what do you think about these warning signs? And, you know, so I think having someone someone who's wise spiritually, but also just with life experience, who's able to say, yes, that's a good thing to pursue, or maybe no, that's not a good thing to pursue. Another thing I would say about just being vigilant in your marriage is to be watchful over some of the times that you may be tempted. So for me, I find a lot of the time, you know, when I might be tempted to I don't know, to have certain thoughts, or to pursue a particular friend or whatever, in an unhealthy way, is what I'm saying, is when either marriage is not going so well, as I said, marriage is hard. You have lumps and bumps along the road, and that's in every marriage. So don't then blame yourself. Oh, it's because I have same-sex attraction that a marriage is not going well. Well, it might not be. It might just be your spouse. You know, there's just issues that you have to work through. But expect in those sort of low times, or it might not even be an issue with your marriage. You may have experienced some grief or loss, or just have a low week. There are multiple reasons, but I think just being aware of those times where you feel most at need and feel like you might reach for something, or gravitate to something that might not be healthy. So just being vigilant, and you know, I would then, from my perspective of faith, I would say commit it to prayer. You know, keep God in the loop. Make sure that you open it up to God and tell him your thoughts. You know, this is the relationship we can have with him is open and honest, and just say, God, I'm really struggling here, or I may anticipate I'm going to struggle if there's some bumpy roads ahead. Yeah, just to be constantly monitoring and aware. At the same time, I wouldn't be, you know, this constant monitoring, don't get hung up over it either. You know, I think we can sometimes freak ourselves out a little bit. yeah, life can be challenging, and we just have to ride the bumps along the way, and just do our best. And like I say, if you've got good accountability, you've got good support, and you know, get to know yourself. You'll know your triggers. You'll know the things that you'll gravitate towards if you're feeling a bit low. But I would also say that over time, you know, time, that classic saying, time does heal. And I think the more we're able to sort of you know, be in a healthy, committed relationship in a marriage context, or even not, if you're single and remaining celibate, then, you know, I think over time, the more we strengthen our pathways in our brain, you know, our brain is very moldable, and so I think if the more we strengthen those pathways to you know, living as we would recognize, living a way that living a life that God's designed for us, and that is, you know, not being homosexual, or you know, that's over time that does ease some of those temptations, and it does get easier. I've found that in the past 10 years. I can speak for other people who are a lot older than me, and they say the same thing. It does get easier. Don't think that you're going to be struggling like this when you're 70 years old. Some, you know, there's different journeys, different stories, and some people do really struggle with it as an ongoing thing. But I think on the whole, it, you know, you can find a lot of restoration and healing just through the process of life, and just pursuing God. That's a really key thing.
Absolutely. You know, there's so much to uh, comment, as what you said is very true. I mean, in my experience of accountability, you know, it is very, very true that whereas when you're single, you're only accountable to yourself if there's something happening. But in a marriage, you're accountable to the other person and what's, you know, kind of what's happening, and especially if it's sexual feeling or desire, you're definitely accountable, because that level of intimacy is reserved for that, you know, for your spouse. So, but I think also it is difficult, not because of the SSA, but because of other things, aspects in marriage, whether it be communication or, you know, all the other different issues which couples have. But I think one of the things that people do forget is that they also become a source of support for you. So when you're down and when your SSA is kind of, you know, and if you say, oh, you know, like if you have that relationship, you have that accountability where you say, I'm not feeling well, I might be triggered, or I might be that, then your spouse knows they need to, you know, that you're in that moment, and then they can be a source of support for you. And you're correct, over time, you, as humans, we tend to gravitate to those who love us and love us back. So over time, we learn to take on that love, whether even if it's you know, from a very um, desires place. If it's not coming, but it's coming from a place of love, then our desires eventually gravitate towards that type of love that we're getting from our spouse, because that becomes that, you know, that's authentic. Whereas the experiences which have come from SSA, they're not authentic, because they're coming from a place where you're trying to fulfill something or fulfill a desire, whereas the love from your spouse is coming from a giving type of, you know, an authentic kind of piece. So yeah, definitely, I echo with a lot of what you've said.
Yeah, I've heard it explained that we same-sex attraction is a form of meeting a legitimate need, and we have to recognise that our needs are legitimate in an illegitimate way. And so I think we have to recognise that we do have have needs. We're needy human beings, but in some ways God made us to be people who need that connection and need that relationship, and so we shouldn't be ashamed of that.
Absolutely.
We just need to know where to channel that into the right ways and into the ways that God designed us for. And when we do live in those ways that he created us for, that's actually what brings us the most amount of fulfillment and contentment. Not to say that marriage will bring you complete fulfillment, because it won't on this side of life. Our ultimate completion actually comes through our relationship with Jesus and through, longing for our eternal home. But while we're in this world, in this life, then we have to just try and as I said, live the life that not try and enjoy living the life that God created us to be, and that actually brings the most amount of contentment.
Absolutely. No, yeah. The journey shifts from our relationships to relationships with our higher being, our creator, and so that absolutely, definitely. Well, I'm aware of the time. I've got questions. How are you? Maybe one more question.
I'm growing fine. We can go all night.
Okay. Yeah.
No worries.
No, I'm just kind of aware you don't want to be too tired for your Sunday.
No, that's fine. Keep them coming.
So we've got a question. What needs to be done when I have a desperate feeling? Because failing many times, dealing with SSA, the struggle. Sometimes I just want to give up and live as a gay person. How to control myself for not doing that? What I feel is not my value. In my life, I experience 2 moments where I've not felt SSA, but then that SSA rises again. Why is it that way?
Yeah. This is a common experience, and I call it the roller coaster of the journey. You feel like you've nipped it in the bud and you're going great and I'm fixed forever, and then a few months later you're in the pit of despair again, and it's a really hard journey, and I really feel for you. I've been up and down it many times, and I concur that there are definitely moments where you think, that's it, I'm done, I'm giving up. I think there's lots of ways we try and tackle this, and I think there are some ways that I've learned are not helpful, and sometimes those ways tend to bring about a certain type of exhaustion. And what I mean by that is sometimes we can there are two things that we can do. We can try and not be homosexual. I'm just not going to do that. I'm not going to think that way. It's wrong, and you just force yourself not to. And another way is to say, well, I'm just going to try and be heterosexual, and I'm just going to do my best, And I think both of those ways, even though they're very noble in their motive, it's a tiring pursuit, to either just try and stop being homosexual or just try and be heterosexual. It's an exhaustive life to do that, and it actually, the more tired you get, the more your strength wanes to be able to resist the temptation, if that makes sense. So that often brings about times where you think, I'm done, I'm giving up, and I'm just going to give in to this temptation because I can't fight it anymore. I've been there many times. And like I say, I'm not saying that that's not a noble pursuit. I think that's very courageous, but I think we have to be realistic about what's actually going to help us in the long run. And I often encourage those who I talk to about this is to try to not try and not be homosexual, or to not try and be heterosexual, but rather, if you have a relationship with God, if you're able to just pursue, because like you say, he's our creator, and if you try and pursue your creator and search through him what exactly we were made for, how we were designed to live. And if you pursue that relationship, I know it seems like a bit of a deviation way of how to, and it's not the be all and end all solution. I mean, Ali and I have talked about this. That, there's certainly a spiritual component to this aim for healing, but there's also a practical side, and there are strategies and practical ways that we can definitely, help us to sort of pursue an obedient life. But I encourage you to pursue your relationship with your Creator and really seek out what He has designed in you. And for me, once I started to realize, the life that He had for me and who He actually created me to be, I started to forget about this whole sexuality, and we hear a lot about, sexuality being our identity. We make it our identity because it just consumes us. It consumes our thoughts, particularly if it's something that's confusing us, like, why do I have same-sex attraction? But I mean, our world is so sexualized. We see it everywhere, on TV, on billboards, and so our sexuality becomes our identity. But really, that's a very world view. And so I encourage you to try and pursue your identity through Christ, or as I know that's a difference in our faith, but pursue your identity in who God created you to be, rather than what the world's telling you in your sexual identity. That may not give you, the person who's asking the question, it may not give you the quick fix that you're asking for or hoping for. I know that's a very long-term pursuit, but I still try and encourage you to do that. For me, in my journey, I was at the pit of despair. I was actually living in another state, and I was really, really quite low, and I was ready to give up. And I just somehow invested my time into growing in my relationship with God and reading my Bible. And it was through that time, I mean, it took many months and years, but it was through that time where I started to learn about, I learned to forgive myself, but to be forgiven. That was a huge thing. But yeah, it was this pursuit of my relationship with God that actually started to turn things around for me, rather than trying not to be a certain type of person. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Because or else it is a tiring and exhaustive fight, and we're sort of setting ourselves up to fail if we're constantly feeling like we're running on low and we're running on empty the whole time. It's not at all very helpful.
Absolutely. I mean, it's cliche, but I always say it's a journey, not a destination. So it's not like, oh, I've reached a point where I'm not going to struggle anymore. It's not like that. And I think the strength in the journey lies in the moments of times that we get up, we've fallen and we get up, and that's the strength of the journey. So if someone's trialed with it, where it's, oh, I just did a 2-week program and now I'm fine, there isn't that struggle. And you're absolutely right. Even with strong support, our aim is not heterosexuality. Our aim is God centricity, So when I started this journey, it was all about, I need a family, I need to be heterosexual. But when you go into it, then you realize, oh, actually, it was God who was calling me, and the way He's called me is through this SSA struggle. And He calls people different ways. He's just called me in this particular way. And then it becomes less about me, about my struggle, about my relationships, and it becomes more about what God wants from me and what God wants from us in as a whole.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
but you're absolutely right. It's again, you've said you've had 10, 15 years of uh, the work, and now you're in the ministry. It's
Mm.
that maturity which you get at the end of the, oh, okay, so that's what,
Yeah.
everybody has their struggles, and our struggle is very, very difficult, but it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that God isn't present and he's not there and he's not supporting us each time we've had a fall, or we've had that sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
And if I can also just add that was obviously a spiritual advice, but there obviously are practical things, that you can try and implement when you're really in that, pit of temptation, if I can put it like that. And I'm not sure who's asking the question, whether it's a male or a female, but particularly from a female perspective, I think you can there are just some questions I think you can ask yourself as to why it is that you're finding either a person attractive, or you're seeking out a same-sex attraction, or a relationship with a woman. Yeah, is just to ask yourself, what do I see in that person? Is it something that often, again, I'm speaking from a woman's perspective, but we see something in them that we like, that we wish we had ourselves, and so we try and we think, oh, I'm missing that piece in me, so therefore I'm attracted. um, just asking some questions like that, or what is it that I'm seeking? Am I actually just after friendship and connection and relationship? Is it the physical side of things that I'm missing out from certain parts of my life? There's lots of triggers and factors that can make us gravitate to either a particular person or a particular gender. So yeah, just working through those issues, and dare I say it, sometimes it is helpful to see a professional counsellor, and I know they're hard to come by these days, but or even just someone of maturity, just to work through some of those things. And I mean, there are plenty of books out there that talk about this type of thing, and yeah, just working out what's actually the root of those feelings. Why am I feeling that I need that? In that particular way, might be helpful. It's hard to explain in just a quick summary, but yeah, there's obviously lots that you could work through there.
Definitely. No, there's so much which is available, as you say, in a
Mm.
practical element as well, which what we're working hard to bring by the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
In terms of if people would like to get in touch with you, Leah, and I know you kind of do support um, people in this, what is the best way for people?
Yeah. Oh, I'm happy for you to pass on my details, email or
Hmm.
Facebook. You can find me on Facebook. I don't mind at all. I mean, I trust your contacts, and you can pass on my details. But I'm more than happy to be, for you to reach out, and even if I may feel that I may not be able to help you, I can certainly point you to people who may be able to. But I'm more than happy to chat. I love this. Well, I love this opportunity to talk about this topic and conversation. It's much needed, and yeah, it would be my honor.
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Mm.
And we uh, like we said earlier, this community is global, isn't it? It's
Mm.
a global
Yeah.
community now. In
Yep.
this, when I started, I'd be like, oh, we have someone from Australia. I would have never
Yeah. Yeah.
thought, that'd be possible. And here we are today. And
Yeah.
whatever what's been mentioned in this, the experiences that you've shared um, is something that we connect with wherever you are. So the we just have a thank you by one of the attendees. They've written, "Thank you so much, Leah. You have no idea how helpful it really is. Thank you for your words and strength and transparency. I can imagine it's not always easy, and I hope you're always guided and that you are rewarded tenfold for everything you do."
Thank you. Bless you. That's wonderful.
So, from behalf of the attendees here, and strong support, I extend your thanks, and may God, continue to bless the work that you're doing, fighting the good fight, as they say, and like we're very, very grateful to have you, and to support. And I know there's some people who couldn't attend, but they would probably look at the recording, or later on. uh,
Right.
uh, but once again, like, I'd really thank you for your um, participation today. And it's probably quite, I think, 11:30, I think, maybe at this point.
Yeah, that's okay.
Quite late.
This is my this is my normal nightlife. I'm usually up this late.
Okay.
Yeah,
No, we
I'm usually eating ice cream.
are you late ice cream at this
Yeah.
point? Yeah, with something to watch. No, it's honestly, thank you. And hopefully we will keep in touch if there's anything that we can help with at all, with strong support, or and anyone that you kind of need further in your work, then we'd be happy to do so.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed my time, and I love chatting with you, Ali. So it's been my absolute privilege. So thank you.
thank you so much. God bless.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks.